right. Well, hello and welcome to the New Advisors webinar education series, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Liz Notling, and I'm the Vice President of Operations for our New Advisors. Today, our webinar will be focused on maximizing your retirement plan. Just make sure this is working. Standard, we do have to share our disclosures. Today, we'll just go over who is a new, our monthly education events, what maximizing your plan means, and then Q&A. A little bit about a new. We are a registered investment advisor. We collaborate with different leadership across the state and local organizations. We do have association and union support, but we also focus on individual and member investment management. Who's our team? Today, we do have Glenn and Nick with us today. We have Sean and Mike. A little bit of history. We were founded in 2020. Although we were founded about 5 years ago, we have nearly 60 years of combined financial experience and 60 years of first responder experience. Just a sample of some of the associations and states that we do work with across the country. And this is part of our Financial Strength Through Education series. Today, we are focusing on retirement. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Nick.
Yep. Thank you, Liz. Like Liz mentioned, today we are going to focus more on the retirement planning and investment management side. And so as we go through this, a lot of this, if you guys have been attending for a while, our education webinars is going to sound really familiar. Some of it is some like core tenets that we harp on pretty often when it comes to how to get the most out of your retirement. And so first, when we talk about getting the most out of our retirement plans, a lot of this has to do with how money comes in, right? So before we can maximize how we take money out, we got to think over the course of our career, how money is coming into the retirement plans. So we know pensions, right? That's a predetermined amount. Those amounts are set by your state or municipality, and that's just money coming out of your paycheck, direct deduct. In the same sense, your 457 works the same way. And that's just money, how we recommend people have that coming out to get the most. When you start doing your contributions, making sure we're doing contributions as a percentage, right? Little things like that can go a long way, especially as you get raises throughout your career. We get a lot of guys that want to do just 50 or $100 a month when they get started, and then they might change it to 300 when they get later in their career or whatever it may be. What we find is super helpful for people to get the most out of it is let's change it to a percentage, even if you have to back into it. So that way, if you do set it and you don't think about it for a while, as you get your raises, your scheduled raises, any sort of payouts, you are going to continue to contribute to those deferred comp plans. And then we talk a lot using Roth. Our first responders on here, if you're getting your pension, which you all should, the Roth is an incredibly valuable tool for you when you get to retirement. And we'll talk about maximizing and how we take the funds out at the end of the career. But when you have a pension, you have that income stream, you're probably not going to necessarily be in a lower tax bracket when you retire. So that Roth is going to give you a ton of flexibility. So if you haven't started using the Roth window through your deferred comp plan, we recommend everyone at least start putting a portion in there. And if your municipality doesn't have it, make sure you have that conversation about adding it. It's simple for them to do. Next one, knowing your limits, contribution limits. So there's IRS limits that change every year. They adjust it up for inflation. But what most people don't recognize is if you get later in your career, there's different ways you can catch up. So in the private sector, you do have just regular catch-up contributions. You can do those in your deferred comps as well. But then for our 457s, there are additional catch-up contributions where we can actually find ways to, what I'm gonna say, like supermax the amount of money you get in, and it can all go into your Roth. Contributions, timing. This is where we talk about time in the market is better than timing the market. Starting early. We tell all when we do your new recruit onboardings or we're helping new hires. This is where we really focus on, guys. We just got to get started because those little dollar amounts early can have a bigger impact than trying to put in large dollar amounts late. So this is part of the save early, save often mantra. And then just coordinating across plans. This is where, like, when we start working with spouses, there might be different places we want to put money, right? Not all retirement plans are created the same. So to maximize what you're getting out of it, even investment options, right? We've seen good and bad, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit here. But making sure if there's areas we're going to save, whether it be in one deferred comp plan versus another, if it's within an employer or a spouse's plan versus your own, a lot of that can change based on when you want to retire, what the investments options are. All those play into how we get the most out of your plan.
Hey, Nick, can I jump in here for a minute? I
Yeah.
think another question that we constantly get, and there's either a lack of education by the providers of the plans or just a general not understanding. When an employee makes a contribution, whether it's a 457, 401k, 403b plan into their deferred comp, that's a different IRS limit versus if the person is funding an IRA, Roth IRA outside of their employment. So a lot of times we get asked, can I contribute to my Roth IRA even though I'm contributing to my Roth 457 or Roth 401k or Roth 403b? And you can. Those are different IRS rule limits. So just want to bring that to the attention.
Yep, absolutely. So then match. This is another big one we talk to a lot of people about in the private and in the public sector when there's a match available. So what a match is it's a formula of saying if you put in X amount of dollars, your employer will match Y amount of dollars. And understanding that match is important to make sure you get the most free dollars. And so eligibility, that's one where sometimes you need to be at an employer for a certain amount of years before you get any sort of match put into your plan. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's a month. So understanding what the eligibility is really important to make sure you know when to add those contributions so you're getting that match. Another part of that is vesting. Once you get a match, sometimes you need to be at an employer for a certain amount of time before that match becomes fully yours. And that's what vesting is. Sometimes it's 1, 3, 5 years, but there is a schedule where so many years in, you'll receive more of those dollars from the employer. So then contribute consistently throughout the year. We have some people that like to do consistently, and then at the end of the year, we'll look to max things out. And this is where working with your advisor, your accountant, whoever it may be, to let you know, hey, you're going to hit your max limit at this time. We need to back off those contributions. Or if you have, like, maybe say a bonus coming or your payout for retirement, we might need to manipulate what we're doing throughout the year to make sure we can take full advantage and we hit our max out over longer periods of time. Because this goes back to dollar cost averaging. One of the biggest things you do that's going to benefit yourself, and why it says the max out trap, is because it doesn't allow for dollar cost averaging. And so then over time, putting in monthly has been proven more powerful than making one big lump sum contribution when you're putting those dollars into the market, which helps makes these retirement plans so effective. And so again, common mistakes like we talked about, just making sure you understand your match formula. Some 457s provide them, some do not. It's a little bit rare on the 457 side, and then it goes into what's called a 401a. So if you see that word thrown around, that's typically where the match goes. But if you have your 401ks, 403bs, matches are much more common, whether you're full or part-time. So make sure you at least ask the question and then understand how you get the most out of that match. So then it comes to the investments. And this is, when you look at these lineups, these are predetermined investments by the employer or some sort of advisor that helped your employer pick these investments. And sometimes you get an overwhelming amount of options, right? And you have to sort through what these mean, right? And when you're trying to do this yourself, they're not always labeled well, whether it's inside your Voya, your Nationwide, your Transamerica, your Empower. They're all going to have different investment options, but there are going to be some things that remain the same when it comes to labeling. And that's all if you go to that next slide. And so most of your retirement plans, you're going to see these labels where the investments are broken down into these categories, right? Where you have your equities, these are your stocks. And a lot of these are mutual funds and ETFs, right? So these are baskets of investments. usually individual stocks, individual bonds, and they're put into these baskets for you to be able to buy without having to buy the individual securities. And so you're going to see these categories, right? Large, mid, small, international, emerging markets. And then it gets broken down into growth, blend, value. And this is I'm going to say what dominates a lot of your sheets, right? And so large cap funds, these are your biggest fund companies. So how these are calculated, and this is going to be like a 101 version of a class for reading these investment lineups that you have. So like large cap funds, how they do this, it's by market cap. And what they look at is how many shares are available to buy times the share of the price. And that share price is what you see when you turn on your CNN markets or Fox News or MSNBC, whatever you use to follow stocks. That share price is what you're seeing. Then they times it by the outstanding shares. So like large cap, your biggest companies. So these are companies that are worth over 300 billion or 10 billion or more. So these are your Apple, Tesla, Microsoft, a lot of the companies you see on the S&P 500. Mid caps are a little bit smaller. They're anywhere from 2 billion to 10 billion in size, right? So still pretty big companies, but they're just not quite as big as these large or mega caps. And then small caps, which is actually the majority of the market on the stock side, is anything between 300 million and 2 billion in terms of size. And so that's how those are really divided. It's based on size. And then international, those are your, think big international markets, European countries. And then emerging markets are going to be like your Indias, right? These economies that aren't quite that big yet, but they're growing. And so I know this can be a lot to make sense out of, because then on top of that, they throw in whether they're a growth, a blend, or value. And you're going to see these words on a lot of your investments, right? So growth, companies that aren't necessarily focused on paying any sort of dividends, right? These are trying to reinvest dollars to grow as quickly as they can. Your value companies are a little bit more dividend focused, and they might be what are considered undervalued. So typically it's like lower PE ratios, things where there might be some more opportunity to buy, but again, more dividend focused in there too. And then blend is a combination. And so where it gets confusing for a lot of people is in these large, mid, and small. You then have to break it down into growth, blend, and value. And so then you go into bonds, right? An entire other category of investing, which is actually multiples bigger than the equity market, the bond market is. And so there you're going to see all kinds of words of like whether they're short term, medium term, and then they're going to talk about quality, like the credit worthiness of the bond, and whether they're high yield, which can sometimes mean high risk, but you'd have to dig into the funds. And this is where when you're looking through these, it's a lot for someone that doesn't follow this to really understand what each one of these categories are. So it is important to ask questions when you think about investment selection. We've seen too many horror stories where nobody at least asks the questions, and then they end up spending their entire career in some sort of bond fund or cash, and then they don't get any, they're not really invested in the best way. So when you talk about maximizing what you're getting out of your retirement, investment selection is going to matter, right? And that's where what we like to see, hopefully your plans have a default where you're at least using a target date fund. And these target date and asset funds, they're going to say they're conservative, moderate, aggressive. And those of you that have been around us for a while know those aren't our favorite terms, but that's what they're going to be labeled on your sheet. And what these do is they're going to assign some sort of risk, and then they're going to manage to it. And so like if your target date fund says like 2055, that means that it's going to assume that you're retiring in 2055, and it's going to get more and more conservative as you go along and hit that point. Some people like that as like a set it and forget it approach. And when it's a low cost option, they're not bad. But over time, if you want to get the most out, there might just be better ways to do it. And that's where it's important to talk to typically your advisor and help get these fund lineups set where they're going to be most beneficial to you. And so this comes down to when to use what. And this is what Glenn and I focus a lot on between these two things. And really it starts with market cycles. We're pretty big believers in watching the Fed, because what the Fed is going to do is going to determine a lot of what happens in the market, right? It's like when the Fed talks about raising interest rates, or like now when they're talking about lowering interest rates, these have big effects on the market and the economy. And so it's something that we don't try to fight. We try to ride with those decisions because of the impact it has. And then life stage. What I mean by life stage is where you are in your career and your life. And that's how we build a lot of these, is trying to help people understand where they're at. And what a lot of big firms do, and it kind of ties in with this target date fund philosophy, where people seem to think that when you retire, you don't need growth anymore, or you need to drive slower automatically when you retire. And that's just never been something we subscribe to. I mean, we have people that retire all the way from 45 to 70, depending on what they're doing, how much they like their work. Is it part-time, full-time? But the idea that just because you quit working, say at 53, 55, you still can't afford to outlive your money if you're going to live to 70, 80, 90 years old. And that's where a lot of these target funds and these big box firms, we think, make some mistakes, because they might have a cutoff where, like, yep, this day we're driving slower. But not a lot of might have changed in your life. And that's where it's important to talk to someone to understand where you're at, and can you really afford to drive slower? Do you need to drive faster? Do you need more value? Do you need more income? What is it going to be? Because there's not good one size fits all rules like they're trying to push in, like with the target date. So then once we get through, right? So we've talked about how money goes in, where we make our contributions, how they work, making sure we're getting the most out of our match, out of vesting, get the money. We talked about the investments we use at a really high level and what you're seeing in these big menus of options for you to invest in. But then how we take money out plays a really big part in making sure we're maximizing all that money you've saved and earned over the cost of your career. And so when we look at this, I'm going to speak more through examples, right? So we have some people working part-time. They might still have some income, and they might have their pension on top of that. Making sure you understand tax brackets is going to determine how much you take out of your taxable accounts, because the tax brackets are marginal. What that means is as you continue to spend, each new dollar might be taxed at a different rate. So as you take money out of an IRA, those pre-tax dollars, that comes out as income. And when that income gets added, it's at that marginal rate. Might be 22, 24, 32% on the federal level. And then depending on what state you're in, there's state taxes involved also. So anytime we're taking out taxable dollars or pre-tax accounts out of your 401ks, your 403bs, we want to make sure we're not unnecessarily going into extra tax brackets. And that's where we might balance it with what you have in a Roth, what you might have in a taxable account, like a regular brokerage account, right? Because they're all taxed differently. So most people, when they think about money first, they think about their IRAs, and then like your brokerage accounts, right? We work with clients to make sure is there long-term gains, long-term losses, short-term gains, short-term losses that we can take advantage of to affect your income. And again, that's how we're going to be able to make sure that we're getting the most out of those dollars we've invested, because we can balance that off. So like we have a client now, she's working part-time, husband works full-time, but they need a little extra income. So we're taking dividends out of one account. And then when they take extra money, if they're funding something, like recently it was a wedding, and so they needed money out for the wedding, we're not just going to automatically go and pull all of that from a taxable that they're receiving dividends from, or an IRA where they're going to pay taxes on all of that up front. So it's important that we take out from the right buckets. And that's where, again, these Roths for most of our clients become really impactful, because they give you a lot of flexibility. If you're already drawing a pension, for example, you're getting part-time income, the Roth might allow us to not pay additional marginal taxes when we start taking money out. So on here too, Glenn, you want to ask?
Yeah, Nick, sorry, Nick,
Yep.
I don't know if you chat about this, I didn't catch it, but in regards to the rules on specifically 457 for our public
Yep.
safety workers, taking distributions out pre 59 and a half, where you don't get the penalties, right? So I don't know if you chatted about that a little bit.
No, but it's a good point. So
Yeah.
when we work with clients, um, if we were to roll dollars for a client, we never roll all of it out of those deferred comps until 59 and a half. You might retire at 52, 53, 54. That deferred comp registration is incredibly valuable, that 457. because if you take money out, you're not charged the additional Fed and state penalty pre-59 and a half out of your deferred comp. So in the private world, if you take money out of your 401k, your 403b, your IRA, your Roth, you take money out pre-59 and a half, there is a chance you're going to pay an additional 10% Fed and then an additional state penalty. Now, if you do it from your deferred comp, you're not going to pay that additional potentially between 10 and 20% on your distributions. And so that's why it's always important to hang on to that registration because it's going to help you save and maximize what you're taking out at the time you start taking money out.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I think this is a huge point to get across to individuals that are coming up on retirement. It's not just about the absolute dollar amount that you need or want for your income. It's also about not only, like Nick said, the sequence of returns, but which bucket we're tapping first and why. Because you can get yourself into a needless paying a lot of extra taxes for no particular reason. So, and we're not tax accountants by any means. We don't give tax advice, but there's just rules and to regards that we want to make sure we educate our clients on taking distributions from. So thank you, Nick.
Yeah. And then just leading into that, at age 73, the government, if you have pre-tax dollars, is going to force you to take your distributions because they want their tax dollars one way or the other. And so that's called the required minimum distribution. So when we have clients that start getting closer, there might have to be conversations about, hey, do we pull a little bit more from your taxable accounts now before your government forces you to take larger, potentially required minimum distributions at age 73. And then this all plays into that last point down there. It's all about accounting for what you need liquid and what you need to survive in funds and what you're trying to do. And for anyone that's gone through our roadmap process, we try to solve for a lot of these problems, right? Do you need to cover healthcare, making sure you have an emergency fund? Can we absorb some market ups and downs? Is the strategy built to do that depending on what stage in your life you're in? Do you have to worry about some of these downturns? Are you putting money in or taking money out? And then again, this chart on the right, just a nice general rule of thumb, but like Glenn said, we're not tax accountants. Um, but this is just a nice general, like I said, rule of thumb on where we look first, even though it's not always the best answer, but that's where working with us, an advisor, tax accountant is going to be helpful. So this is the time where we can answer any questions for you. There's a couple options. You have a chat box at the bottom. You can also raise your hand.
I also know when it comes to
Yep.
questions about distributions of portfolio or structuring the portfolio going into retirement, obviously that's a very sophisticated one-on-one custom question. So, feel free to reach out to us. But if you have any general question, go ahead and throw that in the chat box like Nick mentioned. I think we do have a
Yep.
question.
Yep, I see. I'm trying to unmute Dave.
Hey guys,
David.
how are you?
Good.
Hey, very informative. Thank you. Hey, what do you think? I'm 457 tax deferred heavy. I have no Roth accounts. Any thought on Roth conversions for somebody like me that's got a lot of money in tax deferred but nothing in that?
Yeah, so great question. We do deal a lot with conversions, but the timing of those conversions becomes really important because if you're still working and you have income, right, we'll look at where the tax bracket ends and see where it makes sense to do conversions. And so what I mean by that is we'll use all of a marginal tax bracket if we think it's beneficial. So we don't want you to pay needless taxes, but there is value to getting it into that Roth. So like if your income might be like $50,000 before the next marginal tax bracket, and since you have a pension, we might know that you're always going to be in that tax bracket. So then waiting to do the conversion might not make sense. So then we'll take that like a 50K all the way up to the next tax bracket and then stop there because then we get tax-free growth on that after. The hard part for a lot of our first responders doing it while you're working can be very costly, right? It can get really expensive in terms of taxes because when you can go from 22 to 24, which we normally don't squabble too much about 2% difference because we think we'll make that back over time. But if you bump into the next marginal tax bracket at 32%, now you're paying an extra 8 to get that money out and get it converted to a Roth, right? So now it's a much bigger number you got to try to make back after the conversion. So it's a big conversation for us when people retire. The other thing I'll say is we did just have a client say, hey, I want to do some conversions, but I'm moving to Florida at the end of the year. Why that's important is then you're not paying state taxes. And so these are all things we got to think of when we do conversions. We're very pro it. We'll help people do it, but we want to be smart in how we do it.
Yeah, Nick, I agree with that. You see a lot of advertising, like just do a conversion because you're better off. You won't pay taxes in the long run. Just pay them now and tax brackets will go up later on. And I do think there's some general rule of thumbs, but it's just not that easy, especially in working earned income years. And if you have a spouse and he or she is working as well, you can very quickly compound that tax effect negatively. So it's definitely a great question, but it's more of a one-on-one conversation, laying out the income sources, laying out how much you're going to take out of distributions out of all the plans that are available to you if you need additional income, and managing those tax brackets and the timing of them.
Yep.
Good question.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for us?
I don't think so, Nick.
No?
I think we're good.
See anything else coming in? Yeah, so again, we can answer any of those individual questions for you. Here's our business development officers on both sides for our fire and police. If you scan that QR code, you'll get some information about these gentlemen. They'd be happy to get you directed over to us and get everything started.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
That concludes our webinar. Have a great day.
You too.